The Atlantic slave trade stretched out from the late 15th century until its abolition in the mid 19th century, and resulted in the largest record of forced migration in history. Spanning between 3 continents, it was catalyzed through the triangular trade system, which encompassed the trading activities between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. In order to grasp the dynamics of this institutionalized slavery, it's important to establish the incentives behind pursuing this vast supply of slave labor. With Europe's growing colonial power came economic opportunity. Fueled by mercantilist interests, Europe adopted the plantation system in which large areas of land were required to cultivate cash crops such as tobacco, sugar, and cotton. This was a new economic system in which cash crops were traded as currency. More importantly, this system required a vast supply of intensive labor. At first, the colonists sought out the Native American population to fulfill this demand. However, they proved to be inefficient as they, 1, couldn't physically cope with the harsh working conditions, and 2, were usually prone to catching old world diseases. Instead, the Europeans resorted to enslaving Africans who were generally well built, accustomed to harsh environments, and were immune to old world diseases. Contrary to popular belief, African slaves weren't actively hunted for prior to their enslavement. Instead, they represented the most crucial component within the triangular trading system. Within this system, African chieftains traded enslaved Africans, usually debtors or criminals, in return for industrialized goods such as guns and alcohol provided by the Europeans. Following this cycle, the raw materials cultivated in these plantations were sent back to Europe to be industrialized. The passage encompassed the enslaved Africans' journey from Africa to the New World colonies, in which these slaves were subjected to great horrors. African men were overcramped below deck and would only see the light of day when forced to perform dance rituals in order to keep them in shape. Besides being subjected to torture, disease was widespread, and infected Africans were mercilessly thrown overboard. They faced even greater abuse upon their arrival to the colonies, as the cultivation of these cash crops was extremely strenuous, and the machinery involved made them highly susceptible to injuries. The abolitionist movement was primarily made possible due to the enlightenment of the European masses, as the rise of rational thinking allowed them to question the dynamics of traditional institutions. Furthermore, accounts of Middle Passage horrors helped catalyze this concern. A second aspect of this movement was driven by religious concern over the unholy and immoral abuse of these African slaves. For example, the Quakers were a religious society and were among the first to call for the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade because they believed that its implications conflicted with their religious values. The call for its eradication was also interpreted on an economic basis, as it was proven to be inefficient by leading capitalist figures such as Adam Smith. After its abolition, the Atlantic slave trade had detrimental effects on Africa's demographic and on its long-term economic prosperity. This, unfortunately, provided a gateway to its future colonization and conquest.